Speaking on soul trauma, the plight of LGBTQ plus members. And he will go until 2:29.
I want you to know, because Zach is an ethicist, he would have given this amount of time to any one of you. How much longer should 21-year-old church member Bob, who's fought to live straight for 10 years, continue his personal agony to remain a faithful Adventist? Bob's existential dilemma has two elements. First, his attempt to remain Adventist and retain his admittedly shaky salvation, number one. Number two, or should he live a more openly as a gay man that he knows himself to be, regardless of the consequences? Bob's enduring years of agonizing prayer, study, and counseling begin to show. If you want the full text, go to the online version. I'll just be giving highlights. Official church condemnation of LGBTQ+. Bob's trauma only deepened when his online search turned up two official church statements. The first from Annual Council 1987. Sexual abuse of spouses, sexual abuse of children, incest, homosexual practices, and bestiality are among the obvious perversions of God's original plan. Secondly, he comes across something from the Annual Council Actions of 2012, quoting, "Homosexuality is a manifestation of the disturbance and brokenness in human inclinations." And my short passage ends, "God's word that transcends time and culture does not permit a homosexual lifestyle." Tragically, Bob, bright, sensitive, and by nature religious, is the personification, I suggest, of church-induced soul trauma. A section on Gen Z in America, general characteristics. Bob's trauma is only heightened due to him being right in the middle of the Z generation. Americans born between 1997 and 2012. The current percentage of Gen Z who self-identify as LGBTQ+ is about 17% in Europe and 22% in the United States. And the best polls show that 70% of Gen Z in this country believe that LGBTQ+ persons are morally acceptable. Something regarding North American, European prevalence of LGBTQ. Public support for same-sex marriage is 65% plus in the US, 70% plus in Europe. The percentage of adults who identify as LGBTQ plus in Western Europe, it's about 6%, and it was 5% 10 years ago. And in the US, now it's 9% plus, and it was about 4% 10 years ago. But back to our story of Bob. Bob has a bit of encouragement when an online search revealed that some Loma Linda information. Although he's a bit suspicious of this, as his parents have long warned him about California Adventism. He has found something from Loma Linda University. Richard Hart, the president, devoted a 2017 issue of his fortnightly Notes from the President to LGBTQ plus concerns. And this passage particularly caught Bob's attention. Quote, "It is critical that we understand, treat, and support everyone we encounter, regardless of their hereditary, cultivated, assigned, or self-assumed sexual identity. That is what we do as health professionals. It is what our code of conduct expects of us." And then continuing, Descartes saying, "My own interactions suggest that most LGBTQ individuals are not trying to stand out or fly a flag. They are longing to be accepted as part of the human race and community that they find themselves in. And it continues. The next section is on the widening of God's mercy, sexuality within the biblical story. It's a recently published book by Richard and Christopher Haynes. Bob was further encouraged when he discovered that last year, Richard Haynes, likely the leading theologically conservative biblical scholar in the U.S., had radically changed his mind about the Bible on same-sex marriage. His former book, a 1996 book, The Moral Vision of the View of the New Testament, is something that I refer to. Here's a quote from that. We must affirm that the New Testament tells us the truth about ourselves as sinners and as God's sexual creatures. Marriage between man and woman is the normative form for human sexual fulfillment, and homosexuality is one among many tragic signs that we are a broken people alienated from God's loving purpose. And last year, when that book came out, there was this rather astonishing admission. Richard Hayes says that 28 years ago, he says, regarding what he said 28 years ago, I have come to think I was wrong. Now Hayes was not wrong in his textual exegesis. It's that the Bible is uniformly against same-sex relations, he candidly admits. But Hayes now reads the whole Bible with an expanded vision. I would suggest that Ellen White possibly would concur with Hayes on the widening of God's mercy. Our friend Bob is steeped in a literalist reading of the Bible and also of Ellen White's writings. Yet, as deep-seated as literalism is in Adventism, there's another side to Adventism. Indeed, it's Ellen White's own understanding that divine truth is dynamic and ever-evolving. For example, White contends that, quote, old errors must be abandoned and new light revealed. We must unlearn false ideas. Also, she says, the truths which God gave in the beginning were limited. They were in accordance with the capacity of the people to receive them. God adapts his teachings to the capacity of the learner. Back to my own text. Ellen White's God ever lures toward understandings of truth that is present in the particular time and place. That's present truth. The seventh-day Sabbath was present truth in the mid-1840s. Righteousness by faith was present truth in the late 1880s. Might acceptance of LGBTQ church members be present truth in 2025? Regardless of one's answer, most significantly, there is a progressive dynamism to White's counsel. Now I want to turn from Bob to Nuru. Nuru is a 23-year-old graduate student studying for an MEA at the 4,000-student Adventist University of Central Africa, the largest in the nearly 6 million-member East Central Division of our denomination. Nuru is like Bob in several ways, including that, for instance, he has known himself to be gay from a very early age. Secondly, even more than Bob, Nuru is constantly online. He has the latest AI large language models, GPT, Perplexity. After a thorough search, he estimates that he finds that some 2.5% of his fellow African citizens are LGBTQ like himself, as opposed to, 9% in the US. something about LGBTQ in African Adventism. Of course, Nuru has heard of Pastor Ndumukia, a rising, outspoken star in the Adventist world. Ndumukia has long opposed gay rights in his nation, stating that in 2012, that he, quote, fully supported legal punishment of LGBTQ activity. Considering his position, the General Conference has stated its LGBTQ official policy. A couple of years ago, Adventist Today had something on this. And that official policy from the GC is that we oppose violence, imprisonment, and death for LGBTQ plus persons. Nevertheless, in July of this year, at the General Conference session, he was elevated to be Executive Secretary of the 5.7 million member division of which he is a part. In Africa, most good studies show that social acceptance is very limited and only a small percentage, 1 to 2 to 3% of Africans identify as LGBTQ. Africanization of Adventism is as real as it is inevitable in its impact. The Adventist Church, according to demographics, will be African, majority African within 3 years. And so one big question is, what should we do as a denomination in light of where this country is moving in Western Europe and where Africa is not the only part of the global South, Adventism that is where it is in regard to LGBTQ. I suggest in the paper that women's ordination might point the direction of where we'll go on LGBTQ issues. For instance, there was at the Mohaven Conference in 1973, a discussion of about 50 world church leaders, mostly from the North American division, and they decided that, yes, we should move ahead with women's ordination. We'll take an interim step that will be ordination of women as local elders. That was done right away. But then when it went to the annual council, 73-74, according to Bert Haloviak, then the General Conference archivist, he says that that leaders of the church decided at that annual council to not receive the recommendation of the Mohaven report because it would, quote, cause severe cultural conflict in Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia. How should disputed issues be resolved in a Christian manner? How much more time do I have? I have 2 minutes, okay. I quote Ellen White, from Paul, 1 Corinthians, 1 Thessalonians, don't quench the spirit, but test everything. Ellen White says we should follow conscience, be as true to duty as the needle to the pole. Those counsels suggest the Spirit's leading, and we ought to test, we ought to follow conscience, and that means looking at the best of ourselves as encultured people. So what ought we to do in light of that counsel? I suggest that conscientious diversity may be the way to go as opposed to avoid an institutional crisis. Applying the above Pauline and White counsel to the corporate church, particularly as it deals with women's ordination and then LGBTQ members, it is more complicated when it applies to Nauru and Africa than it is the United States. Regarding women's ordination, the World Church has chosen to forbid willing divisions such as the NAD from moving ahead of worldwide ordinations. Accordingly, 3 union conferences in the NAD have chosen, after doing the testing of where the Spirit is leading, they have decided to go ahead regardless of the general church. Regarding the welcoming and acceptance of LGBTQ plus members, the action there's action at the congregational level, not at the union level. For example, there are 3 congregations in Southern California: the Glendale City Church, La Sierra University Church, and the Crosswalk Church in the Loma Linda area. My last paragraph, my friend Zach, such Adventist congregations are likely to be outliers for the foreseeable future. World Adventism, given its fundamentalist roots, will likely remain majority fundamentalist. And for at least the foreseeable future, dominant Adventism will discount LGBTQ plus persons who will experience numbing to toxic trauma dependent. However, Adventism has a tradition of anti-creedalism, education, and dynamic concepts like present truth, indicating that there may always be a faithful minority that differs from the mainstream that itself is also faithful, just in a different vein. Thank you, Seth.